So just a reminder to everybody. So if you have any questions at all, please pop them in the Q&A panel. I try to avoid putting them in the chat. It just makes things easier for me. And then the other thing is I should also provide you with my email. So my email is aprice@acdsystems.com. And you can email me here. You can email me with questions that come about as a result of the workshop. You can email me with suggestions that you'd like to see in the product. I really like receiving emails when it comes for suggestions. We get suggestions on our YouTube videos like, hey, can you add this to the software? Or I will often get them over email. And the nice thing about email is what I can do is I can just forward that suggestion directly to our developers. And so our developers have a folder that they reference for all these different sort of improvements and suggestions that they want to apply to the new version of the product when they go to start developing it. And they're going to develop something based on how many people want it. So if you have a suggestion that other people also want and people are emailing me about it, there's a fairly good chance that you'll see that addressed in, if not that year, the next year, that sort of thing, when it comes to changes in the product itself. Now, you can also email me if you have any support related questions that you are curious about. Please just email me as well. And you can email our support department, but if you have a question, I can often double check with our QA department and see if I can find you an answer. And then I'm also able to direct that again to support to sort of expedite that process. Yes, Bonnie, you can. You absolutely can. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is going to be doable in, I think, actually back to your version of the software. So Ultimate 2020. There are some things that you can do in the current version of the product that are different now because we upgraded our pixel targeting method, but I'll just make a note to mention that. It works very similarly. It's just a little bit more, there's more, gradients of selection capacity in the new product, but you can still do all these things. Okay. Natavala, can you please explain what you mean? I just don't know what you mean by default file. Okay, so let's get started and we'll start talking about, so there's gonna be a couple things that we'll have to focus on today as well. And one of those things is gonna be masking. And I just want a general understanding. So I'm curious in chat, please let me know how familiar you are with masking, familiar, unfamiliar, or have like some degree of familiarity with masking in general. Okay, so the basics and some degree of familiarity, but it sounds like a good portion of this is unfamiliar, which is good. It's awesome actually, because I've done a fair amount of work in talking about masking, but it's always nice to see when people pop into workshops that are new and have not yet experienced masking, because it's a really strong ability in ACDSee. So we will cover those in depth for those. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to start with our first image, which was actually the suggested image that we work with, which is this noise reduction image that we had taken in our previous workshop. So I'll give you an example of what this looked like to begin with. Let's find my black and white folder. So we started with this image, which was this one right here. And as you can see, there was a considerable amount of blemishes, lots of granular sort of detail that we wanted to get rid of. There was also some water damage on the image in these sections right here. And so what we did is we took this image and what we did is we sort of worked through the noise reduction process on that. So what we did is we took that image, and then what the version that sort of we ended up with was this one right here. So I'm going to take this image, I'm going to open it up in edit mode, and everything that we're going to be talking about today is sort of revolves around edit mode. So just keep that in mind. But so this was the cleaned up version of that image. And if you're curious about how to do that process, I'll just direct you towards our YouTube channel, because in the playlist section under workshops, there's a bunch of information on restoring an older image, which is our previous workshop. So I'll pop that in there so you have access to that. So that was that. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to actually look at this section right here, and we're going to do our best to replace this. So when we're making selections in ACDSee, one of the common mistakes that people have is that they'll be selecting on top of a adjustment layer, like this curves layer here, or they might be selecting the wrong layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on one of our layers right here. I'm actually just going to go with the original layer here. And we're going to make a selection of the sky in our image in this section right here using the magic wand selection tool. So this is one of the methods that we're going to be talking about to make a selection. We'll also look at pixel targeting, and we'll also look at using the brush selection tool. Just a second, I'm just going to close my window because there's honking outside. That's better. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this magic wand tool, click on that. It's up at the top here. And what we can do is we can use this section of our image, this white portion of our image, and we can make a selection of it. Now, your selection might not be perfect to start. In this case, mine isn't. So what we can do is we can bump up the threshold here. And what the threshold does is essentially it looks at the pixel that you're selecting. And if it has a lower threshold, what it's going to do is it's going to be more discriminatory in finding other pixels like that one. Or if you have a higher threshold, what it's going to do is it's going to be less discriminatory when looking at those pixels. And what I mean by pixel is I literally mean the color and tone of the pixel that you've selected with your cursor. This is a bad selection, so I'm just going to go deselect, and we'll try lowering our threshold maybe to 20 or so. That's much better. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm trying to isolate this top portion of my image here because it all shares the same pixel color in sort of, in this case, they're very close to that. So I'm just going to click on those little elements there. And what I'm going to do is I might lower my threshold a little bit just to pick up some of these smaller elements here. And then I might, once I'm done, I might go through the process of actually just brushing out these last little areas here. So we're going to do that. But this is just to expedite this process. It's just to make it a little bit faster. But the lovely thing about this is we can take out elements that we don't like, these sections right here, the sections that we don't want to apply a change to. So, okay, so I just made a fast selection with my magic wand. Now let's go to the brush selection tool, which is the first on our list of selection tools. For those of you that are unaware, so our toolbar is up here, and we have our move tools, we have our selection tools, we have our shape tools, we have our fill tools, and then we have a little list of actions right here at the very end. So we're just going to be, like I said, working with predominantly with these selection tools right now. So if I just click on my image, what I can do is I can add more to my selection being indicated by this red color here. What we want to do is we actually want to right click these areas, which is going to undo a selection on these areas. So I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to do this. I'm going to take my subject out of the actual selection process. And I can actually zoom in here because I'll probably want to zoom in to get these other smaller elements here that would be hard to get rid of otherwise. I'll have a look right here in a second here. And we're going to add a selection up top here, just using the brush tool. And we're almost done. You're going to notice that I don't have feathering turned on here. To turn on feathering, you can click on the little, pardon me, the nib tool here. And you can add feathering. What that does is it adds a point of gradation from the center of your nib, so the nib that we have currently, outwards. So higher feathering is going to be a more gradiated step between from start to finish. And as you can see, that there's a little softness that appears at the edge of our nib now. So I'm just going to turn on a little bit of that, and I'm going to work my way around here into what looks perceptively to be the edge of my image here. So I have that now. And then I just want to make sure that I've just cleaned up this area as well. And you can see that when I use the move tool in conjunction with the zoom in here, it just shows me what the original image looks like prior to any selection. So I'm just going to go through. I might actually lower the feathering even more. And I'm just going to click on there. And I just want to click like that. And this part doesn't have to be exact, just as close to it as we can get here. So now we have a selection of the top portion of our image, the section that represents the sky in our image. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a new layer to our image here. And when we go about adding a new layer, we'll use this selection that we've created. And this selection is going to be used to essentially make a section of that sky image, that cloud image that we're going to add. And we're going to mask a section of that so that we can see the sky added here, but not added to our the front of our image. But before we do anything, what we should do is actually just save this selection. So to save a selection, you go to the top menu bar here, and you'll notice that there's the word select written there. What we can do is we can click on select. And earlier, somebody had a question in regards to older versions of Ultimate. Well, you can just click Save Selection, and that's a way to do that. But recently in 2022, we added something called the Selection Basket. And the Selection Basket is just essentially an area where we can save multiple selections that's much more handy and much more portable. So I'm going to use the Selection Basket for this tool, but for all of those of you that are using 2021 and earlier, you will have the ability to just save a selection and you can reference it there. So I have an active selection. What I'm going to do with this active selection, which is represented in red here, is I'm going to click on this little button here. And what this does is it adds the current selection to the basket. So when I do that, you'll see that a selection pops up in my basket, and it comes corresponding with with its own mask, or basically a thumbnail of what the mask will look like. This is important. I'm just going to set this aside. We're going to deselect because we no longer need that selection. To deselect, you can go Alt-D or just go to select and deselect there. And that removes it from the active selection. So in your selection basket, you're going to see a thumbnail here, right, of the selection we've just created. And that thumbnail, let me just put this front and center so everyone can see what I mean, is this guy right here. In that thumbnail, there's some very, very important information. And so when I asked earlier, I asked about everyone's familiarity with masks. This is what we're going to be focusing on. So in ACDSee, what a mask is, right, is it's a way to tell ACDSee elements that you want to hide in an image or adjustment, and elements that you want to show in an image or an adjustment. And so what this is useful for is you can take parts of your image and combine it with other images, which is fundamentally what we're doing when we're making a sky replacement, right? We're taking a picture of the sky, a separate image, completely distinct from our original image. We're adding it to our image layer, right? Which is this stack of images right here. And then what we're doing is we're going to apply a mask, and this mask is going to hide a portion of our image, show a portion of our image in correlation with what the mask thumbnail looks like. So I'm just going to ask a pretty open-ended question here. But when I go to add a new image to my my layer panel here, what is the intended result in relation to this selection? What am I trying to do with the selection? Just a general guess. What do you think that I'm trying to do with the selection on a new image? No guesses? That's okay. Okay, so Steve nailed it. Gay has also nailed it. Yeah, paste over the sky. So these are great questions, but Steve has the absolutely correct answer. And what that answer is, just to reference. Oh, nice. Yeah, everybody's got it. You guys are doing well. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this selection and we're going to have the white portion exposed on the sky. So we're going to have this sky, the new layer that we're going to be adding. This will be exposed to you, meaning visible. And the black portion of our image will remain invisible. Now that's going to make more sense when we apply this, this image. So we'll do that in a moment and talk about it. Ivan asked, where do all the stack of images come from? How do they appear? This is a good question. So we're working on a new image, an image that we had already worked on in order to remove the blemishes from this image, Ivan. So what we did in this image is we created a something called a frequency separation. And what frequency separation does is it creates a low pass layer and a high pass layer, which is why you're seeing those two layers there. And on top of those two layers are two adjustment layers. Okay, so adjustment layers are different from base layers. So this is your base layer. These three sort of image portions are your base layer here. And then these two are adjustment layers. And you know they're adjustments because they have this little diamond clipping icon here and also an image indicating what the adjustment is. So in the case of this adjustment is the curves. In the case of this adjustment is vibrancy. So now if I look actually where you add adjustment layers, it's just right underneath the layer panel here where it says adjustment layers. And you can see all of these different forms of adjustment layers. We're going to be talking about these, but in essence, the answer to your question is layers come from, you can duplicate a layer, you can create a blank layer, you can do what I did in this case, which is a frequency separation. To add two different layers here. The other thing you can do is simply add a file as a layer, which is where I was going to right now when I was talking about adding this cloud image. So we're going to add a new layer to our layer panel, which is going to add a new layer for Ivan's benefit here. So I'm going to click on this. And what this button down in the bottom left-hand corner does is it allows me to browse for a new file. So in this case, a file being another image. So the sky I'm going to take is this one here. I just chose this one because it's relatively monochromatic, and I think that works nicely with our image. So when I paste this image, or rather when I add it to my layer panel, Ivan, you can see that the sky replacement image, number 002 here, is now added to my layer panel where once it didn't exist. So now we're adding a layer to our layer panel. Whenever you add a new layer to your layer panel, you're prompted to move the image. May I direct your attention up to the top left here, where previously we were interacting with selection tools. You'll notice now that the highlighted tool is the move tool itself. So the move tool comes with its own functions. Basically, it's going to ask whether or not you want to commit or discard the layer, meaning commit the movement that you've made or discard the movement. And then you just have the ability to like align the layer with the artboard itself. So I can go align it to the left, or I can align it to the right if I wanted, or I can align it to the bottom left or the top left if I wanted. But you can also just click on it to move it itself yourself. So keeping in mind that the portion here is what we're actually going to see the sky in. I just want to get some nice clouds in there, something that resembles what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to move it right like that. And I'm going to click the commit button. Now this looks kind of silly right now. What you're seeing above this sky replacement layer is this high pass layer. So you're just getting a bit of the texture here. I can actually move this above it. It doesn't necessarily need to be, because we're just going to be using this mask in a moment here. Normally this would just appear at the top of your layer order. So I have my clouds there. That looks really nice. Now what I'm going to do, and you can notice that I have my image thumbnail here, which appears on the left. You can see that my sky replacement layer is located at the top, which is different than if I was to move it to the very bottom. If I was to move it below my other layers, in this case, my low pass, my high pass, and my original layer here, you can see that the sky becomes invisible. And the reason why is because layer order matters in terms of the way that we reference our images. So the layers that appear at the top are going to be the ones that you see first, barring any masking, which is what we're about to talk about. And then the other two things are opacity and blending, which we won't be talking about right now. So we'll just move the sky back to the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my selection basket here, and I am going to apply this selection to my sky replacement layer. The only thing I need to do here is I need to make sure that the sky replacement is isolated and that it is targeted in this case. So it's got the little light gray, which means this is the layer I'm working on. Pardon me, so that's good. So I take this selection, and then what I want to do with this selection is I want to set this selection as the mask of the selected layer. So I'm going to make this selection apply to a mask of this sky replacement 002 layer. Let's click it and see what happens. That's what happens. So when I take this selection, now keep in mind the other thing that I could have done for those of you that aren't using 2022 is I would just go to my select. I would load my selection that I saved, right? And then instead of using the selection basket, all I would do is when I have an active selection, I will click on the mask button, which functionally does the exact same thing. And we're going to showcase that in another image momentarily. So we have our selection, our sky here, and we have the selection that we made earlier of the sky is now applied to my my clouds image. So let's have another look. I'll just draw your attention now to the sky replacement layer itself, and let's have a conversation about what this mask represents. So the mask is the layer that is to the right of it. This is the layer that we made a selection of earlier, and we applied this selection as a mask to this layer. So we have masked this clouds layer. So what a mask shows us, right? Earlier when people mentioned, what was going to happen to this layer here is that the white portion of our image is the portion of the clouds image that is shown to us, okay? Whereas the black portion of our image is hidden from view. So when I hide that black portion, I'm not getting rid of it. And I want to be very clear about this. And there's a way I can prove that I'm not getting rid of it. I'm just hiding it. The way I prove to you that we're not getting rid of it is if I do something like this. If I was to take a brush, okay, a brush tool, just the regular brush tool, not the selection brush tool, the regular brush tool. And if I draw on my mask layer, not the image layer itself, if I draw on the image layer using a white brush, I'll just add a white brush to that image. But when I use the white brush on a mask layer, what I'll be doing is I'll be drawing on my layer that I've hidden from view. Now, you can see this triangle that I've added to the left corner of my image here. Does everyone also see that represented in my mask now? Do you see how the mask now has a triangle on the left where it once didn't exist? Does everyone see that? This is a really important detail. So that mask is telling us something, right? The mask is saying white is on, it's turned on, you're seeing it, and black is turned off, okay? And people always, sometimes people ask, well, what are we actually referencing when we're talking about black or white, right? Well, the way to interact with the mask, or with any image in this case, is to, there's a couple different ways we can get a white on our image, or a mask here. We could take the actual mask itself, okay, and we could set it as white. And when I do so, what is going to happen is my whole mask will now be white, which means that the whole top portion of my image here, where I placed my clouds file here, is going to be shown to us, is now shown because the mask is white. Versus when we set the mask black, right? It is now hidden from view, which is interesting because it is actually at the top most portion of my layer order, barring the curves adjustment that appears here, which means that it should be shown to us first, right? But because we have set it as black, we have quote unquote turned this mask off. It is now invisible to us. I'm just going to click Control Z and Control Z again. So masks have tools associated with them, which is what we're going to talk about now. When you click on a mask, it's going to have this little box that pops up here, which is the mask properties box. So there's a couple tools here. So if I click on show overlay, what it's going to do is it's going to show the section of basically everything that isn't my mask here. If I click on disable mask, it'll cross a line through it. And this line indicates to us, essentially just turns this mask off again. Which means in this case, it's going to be showing this image. So we're just disabling this mask temporarily. And the last thing I can do is I can actually invert my mask. And this is a super handy tool. So inverting a mask, if we now look at the mask thumbnail again, just up top here, you can see that what is white and what is black is inverted, is essentially changed. And the benefit of this is sometimes parts of your image that you want to select are the more complicated parts of your image. And the less complicated parts of your image are the ones that are easier to select. So the cool thing about that is you can always focus on the easier part of your image that to select, and then make an inversion of that selection. So obviously it's much easier for me to select this top portion here, this small portion where the clouds appear here, than it is for actually me to select the whole remainder of my image. But in the event that I did need to select the remainder of my image, I can still go about this method the same way. And I can use that inversion function to invert the effect of whatever I have here, whether it be an adjustment or actually a mask in this case. So the other thing that we can do is there's this little feathering, little slider here that's called feathering. And no feathering was going to have this very, what's the word for it? Very abrupt end to this effect. Now, some images, this works better than others. If I crank the feathering all the way to 100, what you're going to notice is that this is going to be more gradiated, essentially, right? It's the same as when we apply a feathering adjustment to the sky here, or actually to our brush. So with a feathering set to 100, the maximum in this case, we can see a bit of softness around the edge of this of our mask here. So what I would like is I'd actually like a sort of lower setting, somewhere around 30 in this case, something that allows for a little bit of play in this area, but something that isn't going to appear entirely abrupt like in the original, the default setting. So something around this area is going to apply a little bit of an effect here that allows me to sort of be comfortable with that adjustment. I'm going to, let's see here. I'm going to place that right there. And the last thing that I would do to this image before we're going to talk about a different method of selection and sky replacement is I might add something as simple as a photo effect or a white balance effect. And what this is going to do is whenever you're adding a new image, in this case, when we've added this clouds image here, there might be some slight discoloration between the two images. And I guess what I mean by that is one image might be slightly warmer or colder than the other image. And what I would recommend, just a good habit when you're combining images in this case, is to apply some sort of very light, very minimal photo effect to give the overall image, now the new composition image that you've created, a homogenized feel in terms of color. This isn't vital by any stretch of the imagination. I just think from a standpoint of execution, it's a nice thing to add. So it gives it a sense of a completedness. Okay, so let's save this guy, and then we're going to go into a new image, and we're going to talk about something different. What we'll talk about here is the sky replacement in this second image here. Okay, so Jim asked a question earlier about what about masking treetops, etc., that are very busy. So maybe we should focus on this image itself. This might be a better one to talk about next. And this is a good example as well because it has a singular colored sky. So we're going to talk about this image next and what we're going to do in removing its sky from this. So Jim and Carl both asked questions that I think are relevant to this image here. So what we want to do in this image is we want to preserve the cloud structure of our image. We want those clouds. We obviously want the balloons in this image, but we want to change the background, the sky in this case, the background color. And we can do two things with that. We can change the color, which is what we'll do first. And the second thing that we can do is we can actually change we'll just do another replacement. So we'll make a mask of it. So in this image, what we want to do is we actually want to do a color and luminance selection. And for those of you that have older versions of ACDSee Ultimate 2021 and 2020, what that will be referred to as is pixel targeting. So if I go to select and luminance and color range here, what that's going to do is it's going to bring up this little menu here. And this is a menu to make selections. Like I said, it's one of the things under the selection dropdown here. And this gives me an incredible ability to make selections in our image. The tool is broken into two elements. So luminance elements, in this case, meaning brightness, and color range, meaning hue. So in the case of our image here, we want to target color. And the color that we want to target, okay, is going to be the blue color, because this is what we want to either make a color change to, or we want to replace it with a new skyline. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this color range wheel here, and I'm going to bring it into the blue spectrum. And then as you do that, you can see that the color blue is selected in my image here, and it mostly captures the blue of our sky. I can play around with this. So if my blue was mostly desaturated, what I could do is I could reduce this slider, and by reducing this slider, what it does is it selects lower saturated blues. The other thing I can do is I can take the bottom of the slider the same way as I did with that. And what I can do is I could pull this inwards. And what this does is it targets higher saturated blues in this case. So this gives me the ability to sort of work within that confines and target the colors that I want, which in this case is this like bright blue. Now, the other thing I can do is I can actually reduce the smoothness or increase the smoothness. And I think the similarity to this and something like the feathering function is quite similar. What I might do is I might find a home for this, something that I like, something that targets a little bit of the lighter blues, but leaves some of these little spaces, these nooks and crannies between the clouds. So I'm going to increase the softness in this case in my image here. And what that's going to do is it's going to be targeting some of those sections there. So in general, though, the default blue selection is actually good enough for me. I think this is going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit OK here now that I've targeted with the color range. I can compound this with luminance range. So if I wanted to maybe isolate just the lighter parts of my image, right? I can do that by doing this. If I wanted to target all of the blues that are in the darker shadow end of the spectrum, I could do something like this. I could move these tools inwards. Someone had mentioned that this is that they more or less understood pixel targeting before the sort of pixel targeting method. Luminance and color range works almost identically to the previous pixel targeting tool. The difference is that you now have way more gradients of control than you did previously. So those sliders that you had in the previous pixel targeting tool Now you can imagine them times by like 100, for example, rather than the 5 or 10 that you have access to in pixel targeting. So I'm going to find a home with that. I think that's fine in this case for this image. I'll hit OK. And you'll notice what happens is this selection is sort of presented to us. So the red in our selection here. As an aside, if I go to select and I go to overlay options, some people prefer their selections to look like marching ants. I don't personally. I find this very hard to work with. That's why I always go down to the overlay options and I stick with selection highlighted for all my selections. I just find it easier to work with. So if I have this selection active, what I'm going to do is I can go down to selection basket. I'm going to save this selection of my clouds here. So now that I have this active selection again, I will just click on the add current selection to the basket. And then what I can do is I can apply something like a vibrance adjustment. So if I go to vibrance, so when Carl asked earlier, what if I want to take the color blue out of the masked sky? What if I want to change the color of my sky in this case? What I can do is I can add a vibrance adjustment. So this vibrance adjustment is an adjustment layer, not another image layer, okay? And then I can change the hue of my sky to something more of a cyan, for example. And then what I'll do is you'll notice that when I apply this vibrance adjustment, my whole image is changing color, right? But I can actually apply this selection to the sky, of the sky, to my vibrance adjustment. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it so only the sky is affected by this vibrance adjustment. So I will mask this. And then you'll notice that the colors of my foreground are really green. But if we wanted to do something gentle, like a cyan in this case, we could do that by just gently adjusting the hue. So I am changing the color of my sky in my image here. That's really useful. So I've just done a very quick process to change the color in my image using this vibrance adjustment. Now let's do what we did the same again with our previous image. We added a new cloud image to our layer panel. So we're going to do that again. And what we're going to do, how we're going to do that is by adding a new file as a layer. So I'll click on that and just pause for a moment. Carl, when you were asking earlier, what if I want to take the blue color out of the masked sky, right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you in the sense that what I can do there is I can apply an adjustment layer and then apply that mask to that adjustment layer using our selection. Okay, cool. Awesome. And then Jim asked, what about masking treetops, etc., that are very busy? So the reason why I chose this image, I'm just going to hide this for now, over another image is because there's a ton of information in the sky portion that we're trying to avoid selecting. So these clouds here are what we want to maintain in our image, right? And we don't want to focus in on those elements and sort of, because obviously in this case, an automated selection is going to be the only process that really works. Doing this by hand, when you have a really busy treetop area, that sort of thing, is going to be too complicated. So the way we get around that is by using something like the luminance and color range selection to focus on the one thing that we want to get rid of or alter in this way, which is the color blue in our image. Jim, does that make sense? There's going to be an element, right? That's going to be much more complicated if your sky is not entirely blue in addition to your treetops. So if you have a bunch of very vibrant green trees and then your sky in addition to that is also somewhat green, that's going to make your your selection hard. But yeah, exactly, Michael, you've got it. So we've just masked using Vibrance in this image. But there's so many different methods of these selections or different ways that we can make these selections. So the first method that we chose, just because our image had a lot of white in it, was we were using something like the Smart Magic Wand tool to make our selection. And we just added a little bit of brush selections there. And then from there, we saved that selection and applied that selection to our clouds layer. And in this image, we can use the pixel targeting and luminance tool to make that selection process super easy, because there's a lot of detail in our sky that we're trying to avoid. And then we can use that to apply to a vibrance adjustment like we did. We can use that selection to do what we're about to do. So let's do what we're about to do. So I'm going to add a new sky to my image here. I'm going to click on this one. So just as a reminder, okay. Thank you, Roland. And this will be on our YouTube page, so you can rewatch it. I'm going to click on the add a file as a layer button. That brings up this. I'm going to pick my sky, click OK. And you'll see that my sky is added to my layer panel. I'm going to make my sky big enough that it can cover the entire image here. So something like that. And then I might find up top here is a little bit better for what I'm working with. You'll notice that my layer, once I commit it, there's a vibrance adjustment that is being applied to the top of the sky layer. So this vibrance adjustment that we made earlier to accommodate for the sky in our image is now being applied to the layer that appears beneath it. Okay, so the sky replacement image that we're working with. So in this image, I might actually just move this up top for now. And the reason why is because we don't want to confuse it with this vibrance layer that appears, was appearing above it. In fact, actually, I'm just gonna move this to the bottom for now. So when I move this vibrance layer to the bottom, what it is, it's now not being applied to anything because it appears at the bottom of our layer order, and there's no images beneath it that it can actually affect. So it's essentially similar to turning it off. So this guy, what we can do once again is we can take this selection basket that we have with our active selection. And in fact, let's just take this selection and add it to our active selection. So earlier what we did is we clicked on this button and this set it as a mask on our layer. But the other thing we can do is we can just reselect that part of our image. So let's say you don't have the selection basket because you're using an older version of ACDSee. So you have this active selection. And in this case, you have your layer here, your sky replacement layer. Whenever you have an active selection being indicated by this red here, whenever you have that, what you can do is you can actually just click on the mask button itself. So in this case, I'm clicking on my sky replacement layer. It is the currently selected layer. And I can just click on add layer mask. And what that does is it does the exact same thing that we did with the selection basket earlier. It adds it to the current layer. So now if we reference our current layer, you can see that that same selection has been applied. Okay. It needs a bit of work for sure, but it's pretty good. So this selection is now, so we're isolating the clouds in our image, but the background is visible as well. So we functionally replaced the original background in our image. Now, what we're going to do here is, because there's a couple issues in the foreground here, with our image, is what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pen tool once again. And instead of showing this area down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my brush black, which turns off the adjustment. And I'm going to make sure that my mask layer is selected on my most recent sky clouds layer here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure to, didn't mean to do that. I'm just going to go through my image here, and I'm just going to turn on any portion that shouldn't be blue in this case. So these areas of the foreground that were also selected in the pixel targeting process, these can just be turned off. So when I'm turning these off, I'm brushing on as black. And that looks pretty good over here. Work my way over here. Looks like this whole section could probably just be filled in. Oops. Just right here. Section right here. And then what I also might do is make sure that this is all coming through as well. Because a couple parts of this balloon here that were also blue in the selection process. And right there looks good. So if I zoom out, the last thing I'd maybe want to do with this image is do a bit of feathering as well to sort of blend it in. And I might also apply a vibrancy or some form of color adjustment to desaturate the sky. Actually, let's explain this. Okay, so we're relatively happy with the way that the sky looks here. We've replaced it. We've added a bit of feathering to the mask itself. Okay, just a slight feathering, but a little bit of feathering. The thing we can do here that's kind of neat is we can add let's go to a vibrance adjustment. And this, if I just adjust these settings, right, like the hue, for example, that's now being applied to the whole image, right? The other thing I can do, I don't necessarily need to use this vibrance with the selection applied. What I can also do is I can take a vibrance and I can actually clip it to the image that appears beneath it. So the sky replacement layer is remember that the white in this case is visible and the black is invisible. If I apply a saturation or hue change, it will just be applied to this layer, much in the same way that we've applied a selection right here. So what I want to do is I just want to desaturate that top portion of my image slightly so that it matches the slight desaturation that appears here. Ola asked, when is this lecture available on YouTube? This lecture will be available probably, hopefully by the end of the day. I should be able to upload it. Yeah. So we've just applied a vibrance to the topmost layer here. We've adjusted the saturation, and then all we did is we clipped it. So the clipping process clips it to the layer, the first image layer that appears beneath it. Let's have a look at some of these questions here. You're welcome, Carl. Oh, and then Jim, that answered your question. Awesome. Yeah, so I would recommend using the pixel targeting tool over something like the magic wand when you have more complicated, dense spaces with lots of visual information. Trying to isolate a single color or a single tone is easier than using something like the magic wand in those cases. Okay, the last thing I want to do to this image is something I generally do. Like I said, whenever I combine images, I'll add a photo effect. It doesn't really matter which one, just like Riley, for example, just something to sort of, again, homogenize the effects of the two layers. This photo effect I will not clip. If I clipped it, it would just apply to the sky layer, but I'm just going to leave it as a general application, which will apply it to all the visual layers that appear beneath it. Okay, I'm going to save this as an ACDSee file. Now let's talk about our final layer, which I think is a really interesting one that we can work with. And that's the sky replacements 3 layer here. So this is a good example of an image that is a little bit harder to use the luminance and color range on. Let's see if I can give an example of that. And the reason why is because the foreground, which is this mountain area here, actually contains lots of blues, the same blues that we're trying to get rid of. So we can use this. We can probably find a healthy middle ground where we're applying this. It'll take a while to make this selection, but we can find a healthy middle ground where we're sort of searching for that portion, that blue in the sky there. And then we can go about the process of omitting this bottom section with the brush. But I find in this image, particularly because the foreground and the background share a lot of similarities in blue, the best way to do this is actually just to use a brush selection. And let's show how to do that because it's actually really cool. So the brush selection tool is the one we were using earlier. And what this does is it enables you to essentially make a brush selection. We used it in conjunction with the magic wand selection tool. There's really no need to use the magic wand in this case. We'll just showcase it with the brush selection. So with brush selection, I want to make sure that smart brushing is turned to magic setting. And what magic setting does is basically it has a way of referencing the pixels that you're selecting. So when I'm selecting these blue pixels, if it sees something that doesn't match the tonality or the color of the pixels I'm selecting, it will omit them, meaning it won't select them. So as I go around the perimeter of my mountain here, you can see that my my magic wand, my magic selection brush is not selecting the mountains. Does that make sense to everyone, how the magic brush tool works? It's a really powerful tool that was introduced a couple of editions ago in ACDSee. And I use it oftentimes for making pretty powerful selections with my media. So I just want to make sure that that makes sense to everybody, how I'm going about omitting the sky in this. There's a cool feature of this that should be mentioned. Earlier, when I was talking about the tolerance, when it comes to the magic wand selections, the tolerance also applies to smart brushing. So a lower tolerance will, as you can see, be less tolerant of the colors around it. And you can see here that actually, if I have a much lower tolerance, there's actually parts of the this sky here that it's not capturing. In essence, it's not grabbing. And the lower my tolerance, the more extreme that effect will be. The higher the tolerance, so if I go all the way up to like 90 or something like that, the less that is a factor. And it's really just up to you to play around with the tolerance that you like the best for your selection process. So I'm just going to go around and I'm going to make a selection of the around the mountains in my image, not of the mountains itself. And we're sort of nearing the edge here. Whenever you get to a part that's quite a bit lighter or the pixels change drastically, you'll see that happen in the tool. And all it takes is just a couple clicks in that area to sort of get a better understanding of the pixels. And I want to make sure I'm not selecting the foreground at all, or trying not to. It's hard to avoid, but we're getting there. And I'm just going to work my way around to the very edge here. Yeah, it can be. Absolutely can be, Bob. There's other examples. If you have like a couple trees that you want to remove, or sorry, that you're trying to work around, this is a really useful tool for that as well. But I think if you have a solid color sky, or one where there's very little gradiential difference or very little ombre in the sky, then I would recommend using the pixel targeting tool just because it's going to save you time. But for really hard to capture areas, this is a really good way of going about that. So yeah. So once you actually have selected the edge, that's appearing next to the mountains itself, what you can do is you can actually turn off magic brushing. And the reason why is because there's nothing left to magic brush or try to avoid. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to regular brush a selection on the remainder of my image by using the smart brush with the smart brushing turned off. So I'm just going through and I'm just going to select this top portion here. And now that the essential part is out of the way, we can do this. And okay, so we have a selection here. Now, when it comes to brush selections, one of the things I'd really recommend doing, okay, really recommend, or at least playing with, is refining your selection. So we haven't talked about this yet. This is sort of a nice, neat element of this one particular image. What I can do, okay, I'm going to save this selection first and foremost. Let's just save it to our selection basket here. What I can do with the selection, okay, is I can add another layer. Let's add another layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a sky replacement layer like this one here, and I'll just extend it until it fits my image here. I'm happy with that. Commit it. Let's load up that selection. So when I have a selection here, you might notice this happens. So I'm just going to quickly mask this, this part of my image here. If I mask this, you may notice that you get a halo around your selection. Can everybody see that halo? I just want to make sure it comes through. Sometimes this can be hard to see. Okay, so Clayton can see it. John can see it. Does everyone see that white halo? Okay, so so that halo is basically right at the edge of where your selection is. There's a slight change in color from that white to the hardness of your layer. And we really want to avoid this. So the way that we avoid this is by doing this. So we're just going to reverse a couple steps. Forget that ever happened. We're going to go back to our selection basket and we're just going to we have this selection back up. So what we can do here is when we have an active selection, what we can do is we can do something called refine selection. And refine selection, one of the powers of it is it allows us to do something called shift edge. Now, when you shift edge, everyone can probably see the fact that around the edge of my selection, there's this like charcoal part. And what this is indicating to me is that this part would be omitted from the selection, which is bad when I'm shifting edge negative, but when I'm shifting edge positively, it's actually really good. And the reason why it's really good because it enables me to get rid of that halo. So I'm just going to set a shift edge of like 11 in this case, something that barely edges out the end of my image. Is something that is not going to sort of affect that outline that much. It's very, very gentle. But if I shift the edge of my selection in a positive sense, it's going to add that to the selection process. So I'll click done. And then now you can see right there, there's this red portion of our selection that's been added to the very end, the very edge of our image here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to the selection basket and I'm going to once again save this selection. I believe it's selection number 2, and we can compare the two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that. We can just deselect this now. We can add a layer again. So add our sky layer once again to the top and pull it over the edge there. Hit commit. And then what I can do is really cool is we can sort of verify which one's better. So here's our original one with the halo, which was relatively unavoidable, but we did our best to try to get rid of it. And then we can try the selection 2, which should look quite better. And because there's no halo, because we did a bit of pulling that refinement inwards. Does everyone see the difference between the refined one and the original? Pretty different. So you have a lot of power when you have refine edge. It gives you a lot of power when it comes to your images here. So how might I finalize this image? It does. So Jonathan, I mean, it doesn't cut it off in the sense that it's now removed from the image entirely. But if we really zoom in, right, to our image here, let's use the ruler to show us. I'll bring up the ruler here. Show us where the edge is. Okay, see that? That's where our edge is. Well, that's actually where our edge is. So it's cutting off that much of the edge. And this we had control with, right? When I set that refinement, I set it to a positive value of 11. If I set it to maybe a positive value of 5, for example, it would probably align somewhere in the middle there. So this gives you an idea of how refine edge works in conjunction with your selections. Now, colors. So this image is probably one where we could apply a vibrancy adjustment clipped. Actually, let's not clip it this time. Let's do a different method of showcasing this. So we probably want to desaturate that slightly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this selection of the sky, the one with the refine edge applied, this one here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this as a mask. I'm going to set selection 2 as a mask to my vibrance adjustment. So when I do that, now that vibrancy adjustment is only being applied to the sky. So you can see that it's only being applied to the sky. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to do a, let's see here, probably do a vibrance, sorry, not a vibrance adjustment, a white balance adjustment, and I'll pull it into the yellows here. And once again, I'm going to click on my adjustment layer mask, and I'm going to apply the mask to that, this layer, the white balance to this layer, because I want to match the colors in my image so that it feels like it's all a part of the same image. And then finally, I might add a photo effect. Sure, we'll stick with Sophia. That's fine. I'll reduce the opacity on it. And now I have a composition. Let's see here, hide guidelines. Now I have a composition image. So let's answer some questions. So Ivan asked, why did you click away the selection basket on the pilot photo? So once you've made a selection with your selection basket, as long as you're still in the same instance of editing your image, this is important. Selection baskets are not saved to the image. They're just instance. They're like whenever you go to make an edit and whenever you're working with your file, if you can bring them back up and they'll still be preserved there. The difference is if I was to go to manage mode, for example, navigate to another file, come back to this image with the expectation that that these selection basket items will still be here, they won't, because it's instance oriented, the instance of editing it is. Now, that being said, if you save your file as an ACDSee file, okay, so let's do that right now. If I save this file as an ACDSee file, when I save it as an ACDSee file, it's going to remember the layers, right? So I'm going to navigate away from this file and I come back to it in the future. I'm going to bring it up in edit mode. And it's probably not going to remember my selection basket. You can see that I'm opening up my selection basket in a new instance of editing this file, and it has forgotten the selection basket. However, you still have all of these amazing selections and these masks here. So what you can do is you can take these masks, even though you don't have that same instance of your selection basket. I can take this mask here and I can add it using the add the currently selected layer mask to the basket. And then so that recreates your selection basket from what you have saved in your layer panel. Ivan asked, can you go back and show how you separate the mountains from the sky with the balloons? Yeah, sure. I can go back to that. Here is my balloon image. My recommendation when it comes to images that have lots of different components like this one, navigate to select, navigate to luminance and color range. I'm going to focus on blue, so that's going to use color range. And then I'll use the blue slider here and increase the softness slightly. And what that's going to do is that's going to target the blues in my image. And from there, I can mask that part of my image. Or what I can do is I can assign it as a vibrance adjustment. And that will enable me the ability to change the color of my sky. So Ivan, does that make sense? Does the select luminance and color range tool make sense to you? Oh, okay, sure. I didn't realize. I'm going down the list. Tom asked, this is simple masking. Show me how to remove the background area behind the leaves on a tree. How would you do it here? It depends on the tree. Some trees are going to be way more complicated. And this is simple masking, you're right, but this is also an introductory workshop. Let's find a tree. That's not a bad one. This one's pretty good. This is like semi-complicated for sure. So if you wanted to select the tree here, you got a lot of white and a lot of blue. So what I might recommend, let's go luminance and color range once again. Go to color range, go to blue, select the blue part. Let's increase the smoothness on that. Okay, blue is selected. Now we just need to worry about the white portion here. Okay, so I'll take my brush tool now that the blue part is done. Turn smart brushing on magic, tolerance set pretty high. And let's go through and make a selection of the edge of my tree. Do the best I can here. Okay, it's pretty good. Again, I could take much more time to do this. Now what I want to do is turn smart brushing off. Do the old sky selection, the whole thing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to refine our edge. See if we can get a better outcome. Refine our edge inwards. So having a look at our tree, let's push it in slightly to try to get rid of any. This might not work as well as I want it to, but we'll see. 6, sure. Then what we're going to do is we'll just do a quick vibrance adjustment and desaturate that. How's that, Tom? That would be the way that I would go about that process. Carl asked, I can see stripes in the sky on my monitor. Not sure what caused that. I'm sorry. Christopher asked, clipping to layer only affects images below. Correct. Otherwise, the layers are processed top down. Correct. Well done. Larry asked, I have a photo with reflected sky on water and want to add vibrance to sky. How? The same process that we've used here. Do you mean the sky in the water, Larry, or do you mean just the sky that exists above your image? I just need an answer to that. Okay. John asked, how do you get the selection to show as red instead of marching ants? Go to select, go to overlay, and under the overlay options, you can choose marching ants if you want it. Sorry, here's a selection. I can go to selection highlighted, which will highlight the selection. And the other thing I can do is I can go to overlay options and choose selection exposed, which will expose the selection and highlight the rest. I always opt with selection highlighted. Oh, you're welcome, John. Carl asked, the capabilities in software are truly amazing. History, I first used the 2002 version. I was so happy to find something that let me organize my photos. Yeah, there's a lot more editing capabilities now. I mean, obviously it is the same product when it comes to the digital asset management portion, but there's a lot more involved now. As a note, I have to say, just a reminder that you can use the coupon code Remove Sky at checkout for participating in this workshop. Remove Sky will give you $20 off site-wide. So any product that you buy on our site, if you add that in at checkout, it will give you $20 off in your respective currency. Yeah, check that out. Remove Sky is the coupon code in all caps. I'm glad you appreciate the new functions of the tool, Carl. That's awesome. Larry, I have a photo with reflected sky. That's right, above image. Okay, so let's find an image that has reflected sky. I think I actually have one image that has that circumstance. Okay. Okay, so here's a reflection of a mountain scene once again. I'm glad, Joel. You're most welcome. So in my above image here, well, the other thing about a reflected image here is there's going to be a fairly a lot of colors that are going to appear in the same portion at the bottom here, but I want to make the top more vibrant. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to rely on my brush tool once again, because pixel targeting in this case using the wand may work because it's going to link the pixels. So I could probably get somewhere starting with this, but I probably can't rely on pixel targeting here. So I'm going to start with something like this. It's a good start. And then what I can do is I can go back to the brush tool, just erase the bottom portions because I don't want those. So big portion's already done due to the magic wand tool there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to capture as much of the top portion here as possible. I'm going to want to turn on magic brushing in a moment here. So I'm going to turn it on for this section, or actually let's do it this way. There we go. Turn it on for this section. There we go. And I'm just going to work my way up this mountain range here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Work my way up and around. Okay. Work my way up and around. And oh man, the mist is super tough. This is a tough image. I'll probably add a bit of feathering here. This might work. Reduce the feathering again. Magic. Increase the nib width. And then, so we're just about done this selection and we will be able to apply a vibrance adjustment now that the sky is selected out of our image. So we really wanted to lean on the magic wand tool to do as much of the work as possible. When you're using the magic wand tool, make sure to do not click connected if you want, because what's going to happen is if it's connected to the same color, it's going to select it. So in the case of a mirrored image, like this reflection in the bottom section, if you've got a color that's connected to it, it's going to, anyway, so it's going to end up selecting more elements than you want. So now with our active selection, we'll go to Vibrance and change the color to the color that we wanted in this example, Larry. So Larry, I might recommend playing around with the magic wand tool and the brush selection tool with magic option turned on, rather than using pixel targeting when it comes to mirrored images or images that have reflections. Bonnie asked, do I need to give my selection a name and save it somewhere on my computer? Bonnie, if I remember correctly, you were using 2020. Is that what you said earlier on? Can I get a confirmation on that? You're welcome, Norman. You're welcome, Louise. Okay, Bonnie. So what you're going to want to do, you don't save it to your computer. So let's just add this selection, add this to selection again. You will save your selection. So you don't have access to the selection basket. So I'll just call it selection 1, hit OK. And then what that does is enables me to load that selection while I'm in an instance of working on this file. And when I say working on an instance, I believe that much like the selection basket, right? This is forgotten when you move away from this file. Let me just double check that to make sure. It might not be actually. This one might be held, which is interesting, but just want to double check. So I've navigated away from that file after I've saved a selection, navigate back in, and oh, no, it is remembered. Nice. Okay. So yeah, you're good in that case. So you can just, it's all saved as ACDSee. Like I believe it's saved as ACDSee metadata. It's not saved to your computer or anything like that. But hopefully that answers your question, Bonnie. In the case that you don't have access to the selection basket, you can still save selections, and it looks like you have access to managing them too. So if you have multiple selections on one image, then you can reference them. Okay. Natavalhal, no, sorry, I'm totally mispronouncing your name. Natavalhal asks, I have ACDSee PhotoStream Ultimate 2020, and I've tried to create default file. So whenever I open ACDSee, I will be, okay, if you want to create it, well, I don't know if you can always open the same default file, but what you can do is you can go File, New Image, and then you can create a preset. So if your preset is like, so in this case, it's my last use settings, because oftentimes I will create an image that has 3000 by 3000 and it's untitled and it's 300 dots per inch. So this is my last use settings. And then it just like remembers that and creates an image based on that default image. So you can always try that. If I navigate back to manage mode, I go back to new image, it remembers those last use settings. You can also, you can also create or save a preset. So if you want to create an image that is like 1500 by 3000 pixels, you can save it and name it, and then it's going to remember that image and then use those settings. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it does. It's a kind of a unique question. I don't know really what you mean by default, but I'm assuming that sort of gets you closer to that. We do tutorials on database management, Christopher. It's just I try not to focus. I try to focus on image editing functions and database functions sort of interchangeably and try to go back and forth between the two. Some people really want database stuff. Some people really want image editing things. So I just try to do both. Just waiting to hear back from Natavallo. Okay. Well, those are lots of good questions. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of using ACDSee from a standpoint of creating selections and replacing your skies. If I can sort of, again, provide any sort of summary to this, I really think the benefits of ACDSee here is you have 3 really powerful methods, 2 of which are manual. Selection using the magic wand, using the brush tool in combination with Smart Erase. And then the other thing you can do is you can use the pixel targeting tool itself to target specific pixels or tones in your image. And those enable you, in conjunction with masks, to really like alter the way that your image looks. Like I said, this is going to be uploaded to YouTube. Please, once again, if you are planning on buying something in the cart, or if you have a product that you were wanting to upgrade to, use the coupon code Remove Sky. It'll save you $20. Please use that. Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. I'm just going to stick around in chat and hang out and answer any last questions. But the workshop is formally over. So thank you so much. Please email me as well. Also, by the way, aprice@acdsystems.com. That's me. I can answer your questions. I can answer, I can get forward your suggestions to the developers. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome, Susanna. You're welcome, Austin. Thank you. Clayton asked, I don't know how to pursue this, but I need to know if there are any accessibility features that would let me, the user, increase the brightness for the test for menus, etc., increase the vibrancy where colored indicators are used in the UI. For example, when you demonstrate clipping, I could not for the life of me tell where the icon was on or off. Clayton, have you tried changing the color mode? If I go to options, let me just double check this because I know this is a feature in options. If you go to options in manage mode, there is a way to change the entire display to a lighter theme. Some people prefer this because it's I don't know, it's kind of an old school look, but it is easier to see certain elements. I'm just wondering if you've tried that. Being asked how to create a transparent background from a photo so I can use it as a layer. Thanks, too ugly. Okay. Well, maybe send me an email because if we don't have the function to do that, I think that is actually a really important feature that maybe could be added. So if I can't find you an answer, if you email me, I might be able to forward it as a suggestion for future users. But yeah, I agree. This is really ugly. Some people prefer it. I'm so used to the dark one. Okay. Can you refer to a lecture on YouTube that showed me how to change a picture background? Change a picture background. Can you be more specific, Ola? Oh yeah, my email is aprice@acdsystems.com. Ding. So transparent background, I can show you a little bit about that. So transparent background is, if I go into my clouds image here, so there's a couple ways to create a transparent background. I'm going to go into my most recent sky replacement. So Bing, okay, I'm going to hide all these layers. So when I hide these layers, you'll notice that my image in quotation marks is now a transparency. So there's some other things you can do. You can add a transparent layer. Okay, so this layer itself contains no information. So when I click on add a blank layer, right, and it'll add that blank layer, and this blank layer can be filled with information. For example, if I wanted to draw in it, I could do a little smiley face in the background. Very poorly drawn smiley face. And then, so I believe if you want to save a transparency, so if I wanted to save this file, let's see here. If I wanted to save this, for example, just this top portion of the sky, if I want to save a transparent image, a flattened transparent image, what I would do is I would save this image as, and I would save it as a PNG. So what a PNG is, PNGs have the capacity to be transparent. JPEGs don't. JPEGs are flattened, and then the transparent element of a JPEG will be filled in with white. But a PNG does contain a transparency or information of a transparency. So when you save this image, for example, the bottom portion of our image would be considered a transparency. Additionally, for layers, I think if I was to just save it like this, if I wanted to place this layer in another file, I think this works. So if I was to go into this image, for example, and I place the ACDSee file, which was what, number 3? I believe this will be placed as a transparency. Can you see that, Bing? Does that make sense to you? So ACDSee files are also treated as transparencies when you go to place them. Placing them won't place their layers, but it will place their flattened elements. So as you can see, this layer is just one thing. It's the sky from the previous image, but it is treated as a transparency. Does that make sense? So save as an ACDSee file. You can also save as a PNG file. But when you place an ACDSee file, it's going to flatten that. And then obviously a JPEG or a PNG is already flattened because it's a loss. What's the word for it? Anyway, yeah. So play around with that. You're welcome. Sorry, I didn't get to that earlier. Adam says, Ron, always great tips and knowledge. You're most welcome. Thank you. And once again, just for those of you that are still here, please consider using our coupon code. It's remove sky in all caps. Clayton said, oh, ditto, he's adding to it. As for referring to the lecture, it'll be on our, it'll be on our YouTube page soon. But if you go to our YouTube page and go to playlists and go to workshop, which is right here, that's where it'll be uploaded, and it'll be at the very top when it gets uploaded. So yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? You're welcome, Woody. Thank you. Steve asked, any thoughts on how the gemstone editor, so our multi-document interface editor, can be integrated in the Photo Studio workflow? Yeah, so I would say that gemstone is going to really function a lot more like, sad to make this comparison, but it's going to function a lot more like Photoshop, and Ultimate is going to function a lot more like Lightroom. And I guess what I mean by that is, as gemstone is developed into the future, it's going to become a very, very strong individual composition editor. So, so that you can make really incredible compositions, you can copy and paste elements from different working files. You can work on multiple images and edit those multiple images simultaneously rather than having to commit to one image, edit that image, and move away from it. So I would say that the future of Gemstone is going to be for taking people's images to the next level when it comes to compositional editing. If you are a photographer that uses ACDSee primarily for its digital asset management functions and maybe developments in the developer, I would say that the Gemstone product isn't necessarily going to add any new features that you're already familiar with. It's going to feel a lot like an editor. But to those of you that are familiar with working with layers like I am right now, Gemstone is going to be much more powerful than Ultimate in a couple of years. Just from working with layers and being able to manage elements. Now, it's not going to ever replace Ultimate in terms of a digital asset manager. So that's something to be note. Gemstone is more of a creative tool, absolutely, where a photo studio is more of a digital image manipulation tool. Yeah, and I would say is still a big reason why ACDSee is a successful business, is because of its ability to handle metadata and manage photos and manage files and categorize and that sort of thing. So yeah, you have it, you understand for sure. Does anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise I might take off. Are you tagging the YouTube items on your channel with what version of Photo Studio was used? Yeah, it's always in the comment, the description of the. Which version do you use, Clayton? Oh yeah, okay, cool. You know what? If it doesn't already, this is also really good feedback, and I can absolutely do that. I could just even add a line to the description of the video that this is using ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate 2022, because when 2023 comes out, it'd be good to have that information there. So I don't think it would be hard for me to add that into the description of the video. But when it comes to the, yeah, okay, well then that's, you've been around a long time, longer than me. But as for that, yeah, I can definitely add that to the description to be more clear in those videos. But generally speaking, a lot of those videos, I mean, what I have started doing actually is I've started making tutorials for Gemstone and Mac. So they'll have a little byline that says Mac and Gemstone at the beginning, and then the tutorial section just is generally for Ultimate because it's the one we want to promote the most. But yeah, duly noted, and I will go through, and maybe what I can do is I'll actually retroactively edit a couple of these videos to say which version of ACDSee I'm using. But criticism received, and that's very easy for me to implement. So yes. Okay, that is it for me, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. Once again, please email me if you have any questions. My email is aprice@acdsystems.com. Or observations is cool too. I'll take either. And then please use our coupon code remove sky if you're planning on purchasing anything. It'll save you $20 at checkout. And then email me if you have any questions, any feedback, or something that you'd like to get to the developers as well. Please email me there as well. And yes, it will be on YouTube. I'm hoping to have it uploaded before the end of the day. And I'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody. Take care.